In a world addicted to recognition, where status is measured by likes, comments, applause, and applause masquerading as love, a silent poison seeps through the minds of men, the need to be validated. This need, this hunger for approval, is not innocent. It is not harmless. It is the leash placed around your neck by hands you do not control. The moment you seek validation, you surrender power. Validation is a currency that costs more than it's worth because its price is your independence. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this centuries before social media turned insecurity into spectacle. He observed that men are easily deceived, not by others, but by their own need to be seen as good, noble, admirable. In this need, they lose control over how they are perceived, and worse, they grant others the power to define their worth. The prince who craves validation becomes a servant to the people's praise. The man who wants to be admired becomes predictable, soft, manipulable. He no longer acts according to strategy, but according to perception. He trades effectiveness for applause, and applause once tasted becomes a drug. It is not the man who acts in silence that is weak. It is the one who cannot breathe without being seen. Modern culture has dressed up this disease. It calls it openness, transparency, even emotional intelligence. But Machiavelli saw through the performance. He knew that those who crave admiration will betray their own interests to gain it. They will overexpose, they will over-explain, they will beg for reassurance, and in doing so, they hand over their most valuable resource, control. Let us be clear, validation is not the same as respect. Respect is earned through results, through force, through discipline. Validation is begged for through performance. Respect is built in silence. Validation screams. Consider the man who walks into a room and immediately asserts his worth. He tells you of his achievements, his struggles, his dreams. You hear his voice before you feel his presence. Now consider the man who enters quietly, says little, observes everything, and when he speaks, it is precise, it is final, it is needed. Which man do you respect? Which man holds power? Machiavelli wrote, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everyone to see, but to few to touch." He was not speaking only of actions, but of illusions. The man who constantly seeks to be seen is the man who reveals too much. The man who performs for approval is the man who gives up his ability to maneuver. He becomes visible, predictable, weak. You want power? Then stop trying to be understood. Stop trying to be liked. Stop explaining. Stop confessing. Stop performing. Because every act of seeking validation makes you easier to conquer. The battlefield of influence is not won by those who shout the loudest. It is won by those who speak the least, but strike the hardest. You must understand this. The need to be validated turns you into a performer, a pleaser, a puppet, and a puppet cannot lead. Let others crave applause. Let them drown in their desire to be noticed. You remain unmoved. If they praise you, nod. If they ignore you, nod. Your value must not fluctuate with their attention. If it does, you are not a man, you are a mirror, reflecting whatever others project onto you. Machiavelli understood the power of silence, but he also understood the greater power of indifference. The man who needs nothing from the crowd terrifies the crowd, because they cannot seduce him, cannot manipulate him, cannot control him. He is not performing, he is building. He is not confessing, he is calculating. He is not trying to be seen, he is watching. Validation is a weakness because it creates dependency. It chains your self-worth to something external, something you do not own, something that can be taken from you at any moment. But when you act from principle, from discipline, from vision, you need no witness, you need no applause, you move regardless. And that, Machiavelli would say, is the beginning of power. When you no longer require recognition to act, you become dangerous, unpredictable, immune. Consider history's most effective leaders, the ones feared, the ones respected. Were they desperate to be liked, or were they clear, calculating, and often cold? Did they broadcast their inner thoughts, or did they let silence carry weight? Did they post their moves for others to see, or did they act in shadows and let the results speak? The answer is obvious, and the lesson is eternal. The man who craves validation is a slave to the crowd, but the man who acts without needing applause, he becomes the one the crowd cannot ignore. Because true power is silent, true confidence does not introduce itself, true strategy does not reveal its need to be affirmed. It simply moves, like a shadow, like a whisper, like a storm coming over the hills unannounced. So if you want to become someone the world remembers, someone who shapes outcomes instead of reacting to them, there is one thing you must learn before all others: stop needing them to see you. Let them wonder, let them project, let them doubt, let them question. But you, move. They will tell you to speak your truth, to open up, to be vulnerable, to be seen. But ask yourself, who benefits when you do that? The world does not reward honesty, it rewards leverage. And those who give away their internal map, what they want, what they fear, what they hope for, hand over the most dangerous kind of leverage, emotional exposure. Machiavelli knew this before psychology gave it a name. He understood that the man who reveals himself too soon becomes an open book, and open books are easily rewritten by others. You are not obligated to explain yourself, not to friends, not to colleagues, not to critics, especially not to critics, because the critic is not always looking for truth. More often he's looking for blood. And when you hand him your need to be understood, to be accepted, to be seen as good, he'll use it against you. Not because he's evil, but because he can, Machiavelli warned. Men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear. The man who needs to be loved, needs validation, sacrifices the strategic advantage of being feared. Let that settle. Every time you seek approval, you reduce your strategic weight, you soften your presence, you expose your position, you decrease your optionality. Let me say it plainly, the man who constantly seeks validation has no gravity, and men without gravity are not followed. They are floated around, pushed, pulled, forgotten. You will not rise by becoming agreeable, you will rise by becoming undeniable, and that requires internal certainty that does not tremble at rejection. Look around you. Who are the men most praised, the loudest, the most dramatic, the most likable? And now ask, who are the men most obeyed? Different question, different outcome. Respect and validation are not twins, they are rivals. One is earned, the other is bartered. To seek validation is to negotiate your soul. You begin bending, explaining, polishing your edges until there are no edges left. You become round, smooth, harmless, digestible. But Machiavelli warned, it is much safer to be feared than loved. When of the two, either must be dispensed with. Why? Because fear respects distance. Love invades it. Validation demands proximity. It demands intimacy, vulnerability, softness. But power thrives in silence, in mystery, in strategic separation. The more they know, the less they imagine. And imagination is where power lives. You want them guessing, not assuming. You want them leaning forward, not sitting back. Validation removes all that. It puts your value on clearance. You become common, readable. A man with his insides outside. No mystique, no aura, no leverage. You are not a page, you are the author, and you do not hand your manuscript to every pair of clapping hands. The crowd is not your master. Understand this. If the crowd can give you validation, the crowd can take it away, and it will. One day you will speak, and they will not applaud. One day you will try to be understood, and they will misunderstand. One day you will offer your soul in the form of honesty, and they will walk away. And if your identity depends on that applause, on that understanding, on that acceptance, then your power was never yours to begin with. You were merely leasing it from others, and their lease can end whenever they grow bored. This is why the strong remain emotionally self-contained. They are not cold, they are disciplined, they are not rude, they are detached. They are not silent because they lack words, but because they do not waste them. Machiavelli would call this the governance of one's passions. The ability to regulate your external expressions so that they align with long-term power, not momentary relief. Validation gives you nothing that lasts. It gives you a high, a spike, a brief dopamine surge, but then it makes you chase it again and again until your worth becomes measured by outside noise, until your strategy becomes reaction, until your silence becomes unbearable. But the dangerous man is comfortable in silence. He does not explain his ambition. He achieves it. He does not beg for recognition. He earns silence when he enters the room. He does not crave visibility, because he understands that mystery is worth more than clarity. Clarity is for sheep. Mystery is for wolves. So practice not being understood. Practice being silent while others perform. Practice being unshaken when applause never arrives. Because in that discipline, you grow teeth. In that restraint, you build density. In that silence, you become someone whose name carries weight, even when his voice is quiet. Machiavelli's world was filled with liars, spies, assassins, and kings. But even in that chaos, he understood this simple truth. A man who doesn't need validation cannot be manipulated, and a man who cannot be manipulated is already halfway to power. They'll call you arrogant for not explaining yourself. They'll call you cold for not sharing your feelings. They'll call you mysterious, intimidating, standoffish for one reason alone, because you don't hand them your inner world on a silver plate. But here is the truth. Machiavelli knew, and which modern man has forgotten, The moment they understand you, they stop respecting you. The need to be understood is often disguised as connection, but what it really is surrender. Surrender of advantage, surrender of unpredictability, surrender of the upper hand. And for what? So they like you? So they get you? Machiavelli would laugh. He would say, let them misunderstand you so long as they cannot defeat you. In politics, in power, in war, your edge is not how loudly you speak, it's how much you hold back, because the less they know, the more they project, and projection is power, if it's controlled. Think about the legends, the men with presence. They didn't flood the world with their emotions, their dreams, their personal philosophies. They said less, and in saying less they became more. Their silence created space, their restraint forced attention, their mystery demanded curiosity. Because people don't follow what's familiar, they follow what they can't quite figure out. Familiarity invites comparison, mystery creates distance. And distance, Machiavelli would argue, is necessary for fear, and fear is more reliable than love. Love wavers, fear obeys. You see this everywhere, in the boardroom, in relationships, in politics. The man who constantly explains himself loses leverage. The man who always shares his thoughts gives away his strategy. The man who needs to be understood cannot lead, because leadership is not therapy. You are not here to be validated. You are here to be effective. Machiavelli saw it clearly. In The Prince, he reminds us that appearances matter more than intentions, and yet the wise man controls the appearance by saying less. You don't explain your plan, you don't justify your moves, you don't defend your character every time it's questioned. You operate, you act, you execute, and when they ask, why did he do that? Let the silence do the talking, let them guess, because the guessing is what makes them hesitate. And hesitation, in a world built on speed and competition, is fatal. Let them hesitate. While they wonder what you'll do next, you've already done it. This is the advantage of the unvalidated man. He does not wait for permission. He does not move on applause. He does not seek to be praised. He seeks to prevail. And when he does prevail, he lets others announce it. He remains quiet, because power, when truly held, does not need to be shouted. The man who needs validation will always try to prove something, his worth, his talent, his loyalty, his heart. But the Machiavellian man, he proves nothing. He knows, and because he knows, he doesn't explain, he demonstrates, through silence, through presence, through results. This is the core reversal you must accept. The world teaches you to speak more to gain more, but in truth, you must speak less to become more, because the more you speak, the more predictable you are. The more predictable you are, the more manipulable you become. Do you see? Words become your trap. They record your intent, they expose your weakness, they invite challenge. But silence has no fingerprints. It cannot be traced. It cannot be used against you. It cannot betray you, because it says nothing. And in a world addicted to expression, that is terrifying. They don't fear your words, they fear your restraint, because restraint signals self-mastery, and self-mastery is the first requirement for power. A man who cannot govern his need to be liked will never govern anything else. Let others chase applause. Let them drown in the dopamine rush of likes and approval. You build, in silence. And when they finally look up from their performances, when the clapping dies down and the spotlight moves, there you are, unbothered, unshaken, unexposed, not because you were hiding, but because you never handed them the map. So if you must speak, speak with purpose. If you must express, express with intent. If you must reveal, reveal with control. But never ever speak for approval, because the man who speaks for approval has already lost the game Machiavelli mastered, the game of perception. They will say you're hiding something. Let them, because what they call hiding, Machiavelli called power. We live in an age where exposure is celebrated, where confession is currency, where the highest virtue is to be endlessly visible, endlessly explainable, endlessly open. But Machiavelli would have called this madness, to expose oneself without gain, to declare one's strategy before the game is played, to reveal one's fears, hopes, doubts for the sake of connection. He would ask, why? What does it buy you? What advantage does it give? And if it gives no advantage, then it must be discarded. You must understand, openness is not a virtue when it costs you position. Transparency is not a strength when it weakens your hand. A man who must always be seen, who must always be understood, who must always be liked, he is not strong, he is starving. Starving for approval, starving for emotional validation, starving for the illusion of connection. And starvation makes men sloppy. It makes them desperate. It makes them compromise. It makes them depend on others to regulate their internal state. Machiavelli would call this fatal, because the man who cannot regulate himself becomes a servant to those who can. You must become full without applause. You must become steady without feedback. You must become complete without anyone needing to say, well done, because validation is not fuel, it is sugar. It spikes your energy, then crashes your momentum. It makes you dependent on noise, when what you need is focus. Let's get tactical. In a negotiation, the person who speaks first often loses. Why? Because the first to speak reveals position, priority, and desire. But the one who waits, who withholds, who sits silently while others fidget and fill the space with nervous words, that one gathers power. This doesn't just apply in business, it applies in relationships, in leadership, in war. The first to beg for clarity always loses to the one who remains unreadable, because clarity is a cage, and when you define yourself too early, too often, too openly, others begin to navigate you like a map. They know where you stand, they know what you fear, they know how to move you. But when you refuse to hand them that clarity, they become unsure, they hesitate, and in hesitation you rise. Machiavelli didn't preach chaos, he preached control, control of image, control of narrative, control of self. And the man who seeks validation relinquishes all three. He hands over image to the crowd, he hands over narrative to their perception, he hands over self to their approval, and then wonders why he feels powerless. It's because he built himself on borrowed bricks. Your power cannot be outsourced, it must be built in silence, built when no one is watching, built when no one is praising, built when no one is clapping. And that kind of power, it cannot be shaken, because it was never dependent on noise. Let's go deeper. Imagine two men walk into a room. One walks quickly, greeting everyone, smiling wide, filling the air with words, looking around to make sure he's being seen. The other enters quietly. His eyes scan once, he sits, he says nothing unless asked. Who holds more weight? It is not the louder man, it is the heavier presence, and heaviness is built in silence. Machiavelli would say, let others define you only when it no longer matters what they say. Until then, remain an enigma. This isn't aloofness. This is strategy. The less you offer, the more they wonder. The more they wonder, the more they assume. The more they assume, the more control you have. Because assumptions can be weaponized, clarity cannot. This is why the smartest leaders speak last. This is why the most dangerous minds explain least. This is why the man who doesn't flinch when he's misunderstood becomes the one everyone eventually listens to. Because silence is not weakness, it is tension. It is dominance waiting to be revealed. You must learn to hold tension, to resist the temptation to fill the void, to be misread on purpose, to be doubted on purpose, because when the moment comes and you do speak, they will listen, because your words weren't constant, they were rare, and rarity breeds reverence. The man addicted to validation burns himself out trying to be seen. The man trained in silence builds the world others clap for, without needing the clapping. So ask yourself, would you rather be admired or obeyed? Would you rather be liked or remembered? Because the man who needs validation may win hearts, but the man who masters silence, he wins empires. Consider how people rush to fill your silence, how they squirm when you withdraw your attention. This is power, not in what you do, but in what you withhold. When you master the art of absence, you control the game without playing it. There comes a point where you must choose. Do you want to be understood, or do you want to be unforgettable? Because you cannot be both. The man who is easily understood is easily replaced. He becomes common, relatable, digestible. His presence creates no tension, no intrigue, no weight. But the man who withholds, who controls what he gives, who reveals only what serves, he becomes a symbol, a force, a question that remains unanswered. And in power, questions are more dangerous than answers. Machiavelli knew this deeply. He studied rulers, princes, generals, not by their warmth, but by their gravity. And gravity is never loud, it is silent, it is invisible, and yet it pulls everything toward it. The man who needs validation becomes a performer, but the man who walks with gravity becomes a presence. So you must kill the performer within you. You must unlearn the habit of checking for applause after every sentence, every choice, every success. You must stop posting your wins like confessions. You must stop explaining your losses like apologies. You must stop asking, do they see me? Because in truth, they don't need to. When you become undeniable, visibility takes care of itself. When you create impact, recognition follows without you chasing it. And if it doesn't, good. Let them miss it. Let them ignore it. Let them remain blind. Because what's built without witnesses is built stronger. Machiavelli believed the prince should not fear being misjudged in the short term, so long as the long game was secured. He would say, a wise man does at once what a fool does finally. The fool rushes to explain. The wise man delays. He lets reality speak for him. Understand this: power is quiet. It does not beg to be seen. It reveals itself only when it cannot be denied. This is why needing validation is not just a weakness, it is a form of self-betrayal. You are trading long-term command for short-term comfort, trading legacy for likes, mastery for mentions, dominance for dopamine. You must stop. Stop checking if your silence is being noticed. Stop wondering if your restraint is being respected, because it is. Even if they say nothing, they feel it. Even if they pretend not to care, they adjust to it. Even if they don't acknowledge you, they study you. The man who doesn't explain himself creates a vacuum, and human nature hates vacuums, so they fill it. They assign meaning, they project strength, they imagine depth, and often, they imagine more than you could have possibly articulated. This is the gift of controlled mystery. It gives you more power than any explanation ever could. Consider this in daily life. In a disagreement, remain calm. Let silence weigh heavier than argument. In ambition, move without announcements. Let your results expose your intent. In criticism, do not defend. Let your existence contradict their assumptions. Each time you resist the urge to explain, you reinforce your frame, and your frame, your internal steadiness, is what others unconsciously respond to. Machiavelli would tell you, the promise given was a necessity of the past, the word broken is a necessity of the present. That's not cynicism, that's clarity. The world does not run on honesty, it runs on strength, and strength often requires withholding, not lying, but choosing what serves, because truth without timing is sabotage, and authenticity without discernment is suicide. You must protect your edge, not your image. The man who polishes his image for the sake of being liked becomes dependent on softness. He avoids offense, he dulls his sharpness, but the man who sharpens his mind, his instincts, his intent, he becomes dangerous, even when quiet, especially when quiet. They say still waters run deep, but Machiavelli would go further. Still waters drown kings who mistake silence for weakness. So drown them in your discipline, drown them in your unpredictability. Drown them in the sheer weight of what you're not saying, because in that silence, you become more than a man. You become a force to be interpreted, to be feared, to be followed. This is not about being cold. This is about being untouchable. The untouchable man does not hate others. He simply no longer needs them. Not for praise, not for confirmation, not for permission. And that independence, real, quiet, internal independence, is what separates rulers from subjects. So let them talk. Let them judge. Let them guess. You say little. You move deliberately, you win silently. They'll never understand how you did it. And that is exactly how it should be. Because by the time they realize what you've built, what you've become, it's too late. The foundation was laid in silence, the moves were made in shadows, the victory was claimed without a speech. Machiavelli would call this the highest form of mastery, to win without needing to explain how. The modern world has trained men to narrate their every move, to share before the result, to reveal before the reward. But results don't come from announcements, they come from pressure applied over time, quietly, steadily, ruthlessly. You do not need to be seen building the empire, you only need to make sure the empire stands when the dust settles, because in the end, applause dies, but consequence remains. They will clap for someone else tomorrow, but the system you built, the power you forged, the respect you commanded without asking for it, that stays. This is your task now. Resist the culture of exposure. Reject the temptation to be understood. Let them mislabel you. Let them underestimate you. Let them think your silence is a weakness. Because the longer they think that, the more advantage you hold. Every moment you don't explain is a moment you protect, leverage. Every question they ask that you do not answer becomes a trap for them, not you. Machiavelli would tell you, everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. Make use of this. Appear when it serves you, disappear when it protects you. Give just enough to be respected, but never so much that you become predictable. Because once you are predictable, you are controllable. And once you are controllable, you are disposable. The man who doesn't need validation becomes a paradox. They can't read him, can't corner him, can't guilt him, can't win against him. Why? Because he doesn't flinch at rejection, doesn't weaken under silence, doesn't chase recognition. He chases results. And when those results arrive, he does not gloat, he does not declare, he does not celebrate publicly, he simply moves on to the next target. And the crowd, they're left behind, clapping for a ghost they never really knew. This is how power moves, not with noise, but with inevitability. You want to lead, then you must learn this final law. Control your narrative by refusing to speak it. Let your life be your argument. Let your work be your response. Let your outcomes be the only thing they can't ignore. Because when you no longer need their validation, you control the frame. And when you control the frame, you control the world within it. So hold the line, say less, observe more, execute quietly, correct privately, grow in shadows, because the man who needs nothing gains everything, and the man who speaks only when it serves, he never has to raise his voice to be heard. This is the Machiavellian path, not cold, not cruel, just calculated. In a world of noise, be the silence that unsettles. In a world of weakness, be the force that endures. In a world of performers, be the one who never auditioned, because the role was already his. Power belongs to the one who doesn't need the spotlight. Respect belongs to the one who never begged for it. Victory belongs to the one who let others talk while he built the outcome in silence. If you've made it this far, it means something in you already knows that the need to be liked is the cage, and that silence is the key. A part of you is already walking the path Machiavelli spoke of. The path where being misunderstood is not failure, it's freedom. Where being rejected is not the end, it's protection. Where being alone is not emptiness, but clarity. Now ask yourself, are you ready to be unseen, unloved, even judged, if it means keeping your sovereignty intact? Are you ready to stop performing and start moving with quiet power? If this message reached you, if it resonated, write in the comments, I choose power over praise. Let's see how many of you are truly ready for this transition. And above all, don't stop here, watch the next video. It's not just a suggestion, it's part of the transformation. See you there.